Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to another Dhul Hijjah nights. We're on to the 7th page of the blessed Surah, Surah al-Hajj. We're in the respect masjid, reflecting on the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala count these reflections and discussions and place in our mizat of hasanat, inshallah. We have again Sheikh Imam Baytullah. Tafaddal Imam Baytullah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ويستعجلونك بالعذاب ولن يخلف الله وعده وإن يوما عند ربك كألف سنة مما تعدون وكأين من قرية أمليت لها وهي ظالمة ثم أخذتها وإلي المصير قل يا أيها الناس إنما أنا لكم نذير مبين فالذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لهم مغفرة ورزق كريم والذين سعوا في آياتنا معاجزين أولئك أصحاب الجحيم وما أرسلنا من قبلك من رسول ولا نبي إلا إذا تمنى ألقى الشيطان في أمنيته فينسخ الله ما يلقي الشيطان ثم يحكم الله آياته والله عليم حكيم ليجعل ما يلقي الشيطان فتنة للذين في قلوبهم مرض والقاسية قلوبهم وإن الظالمين لفي شقاق بعيد وليعلم الذين أوتوا العلم أنه الحق من ربك فيؤمنوا به فتخبت له قلوبهم وإن الله لهادي الذين آمنوا إلى صراط مستقيم ولا يزال الذين كفروا في مرية منه حتى تأتيهم الساعة بغتة أو يأتيهم عذاب يوم عقيم صدق الله العظيم
جزاك الله خير.
آمين أجمعين.
MashaAllah, what a recitation. Welcome back, brothers and sisters. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Continuing on verse number 47. They challenge you to hasten the coming upon them of God's punishment with which they threatened. Let them know that God never fails to fulfill His promise, but a day with your Lord is like 1,000 years in your reckoning. Normally, Allah's promise is usually said, Shaykh Yusuf, to Wa'ad Allah is usually the Jannah, whereas the Wa'id is the Jahannam and the fire. But here, it's a bit of a threat, but it's being used somewhat, you could say, in a metaphorical way. Allahu alam. Just like وَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ.
That can be one angle. The other angle is that the promise of Allah is true in this case. And in part because the denial of the people of disbelief, and in this case shirk, is done, by way of mockery. They're trying to mock the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so in many ways, in what they're promised, is exactly what they think will not come. But where for the believers is the promise of goodness is not a threat. But it's almost like it's being reversed.
Yeah, because they seek you the harrowing of the punishment, but anyway, Allah will not. This 1,000 years has been interpreted different ways, that a day with your Lord is like 1,000 years, from what you count. Just shows that the days, the counting, some have said on the Day of Judgment, the timing is very different. That a day there can equal 1,000 years. And there's been said that there's a hadith that says that the poor of the believers enters Jannah half a day before the rich people from the believers. And they've concluded from that it's 500 years because half of a day. But they're different countings, but it just goes to show that sometimes timing is sometimes relative.
Yes, and that's what some of the scholars have noted, that whether it's 1,000 days or it's one day, with regard to the qudrah, the power and the ability of Allah, they're equal. And so the disbelievers in this case, because they're not seeing it come to them, in the immediate, they're taking that as it will not come at all. But the reality is that whatever time period it may be, however we calculate time, at the end of the day, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is standing by His promise. And those who believe will be rewarded, and those who disbelieve will be compensated for their actions.
And just think about it. Imagine if you can see a day incomplete. You know what's going to happen in the evening, in the afternoon, and you see someone hurrying something in the morning, but you know what's going to happen in the afternoon. You almost look at it in pity, like you're looking at a child. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if for Him time, we're seeing it. People are hurrying for things. Where is it? Where are the signs? But He sees our whole lifetime as one day. So it's sometimes it makes us wonder if we were to look at life from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's perspective.
Yeah,
we can.
It's for the believer to remain in the dhikr of Allah is supposed to be effecting within us a sense of tranquility. أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. It is a statement that the Quran makes with regard to the remembrance of Allah and the state of the heart, how the effect should be, that tranquility and that peace. Because if the reality of we're also called to contemplate upon the last day in death. And it is a scary reality. It can throw you off of, the norm of life, so to speak. But the complete, Allah gives us that sense of forgetfulness, not in the way of being negligent of remembering Allah, but in the sense of allowing us to work with daily life. Memory at times, it can bring some bad imagery, or it can bring bad feelings, and we can become incapacitated. But it's from the mercy of Allah that, we kind of are not seeing death right before our eyes, but we're also called not to be negligent of it. But there's those that their hearts don't allow them to see the truth of it. Their hearts don't allow them to realize, to grasp intelligently, on the nature of life and so on. So that's kind of the theme that we were on before, on the theme of the heart. So this prolonging of the day, so to speak, is really showing that the state of the heart is one that is not intellectually grasping the reality of life, that the human being will come to an end in this realm, and that Allah wa ta'ala as the creator has asked us to reflect upon this and to come to a point of conviction of the heart. That's work that has to be done. It's just not an automatic. It's work that has to be done, just like scientific discovery demands work. Scientific discovery demands that we put an effort into investigation. But the Quran is also, calling us to contemplate and reflect on the truths of life itself and come to that conclusion that this world comes to an end. Then we have to question, well, is there a hereafter? And that's where, we're put to the trial. Do we believe in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as being the carrier of truth or not? Do we believe in the Quranic truths, or not? And so the disbeliever in this case is, just completely ignoring, not only ignoring at this level, is mockery and going against the believers.
Yeah, and that connects to them hastening the punishment in a mockery way.
So their senses don't even help them to acknowledge the reality of life. The sense knowledge is not helping them to have a heart which is able to accept the truth of, that there is a day of judgment and, there's accountability for life has meaning, in other words.
Yeah.
If life is meaningful, we have to come to account. If life is not meaningful, then there's no account. But if the world is meaningful, that means that it has to be ordered in some way. There's some logic to it. There's some tie-in. There's some cause. There's some effect, or else everything will be in chaos. But we see the universe itself. It operates, it functions, it moves as a machine. Is it illogical to think that does that by itself? But then the human world, the human reality is, okay, well, is our life illogical? Is our life without meaning? Do our actions make sense? Does good have value? And if we say that good has value, if we say life has meaning, if we say humans are responsible, intelligent beings, then there has to be some acknowledgement of the hereafter.
Sometimes people, they take a breather and they say, life seems too empty, too purposeless, useless, Asha. But when you said that sentence, if there's accountability, there's meaning. And if there's meaning, there's accountability. The moment you think of the accountability, it just it removes the thought that life is meaningless or purposeless.
Well, no one wants to be in, just look at the level of human relationships. No one wants to be in a relationship in which they're constantly being lied to, or there's treachery in the relationship, or there's a lack of compassion. That's for believer or disbeliever. Mm. But for whatever reason, we don't think about virtue in this regard. Where is it that we get that sense that if a person lies to me is wrong? Where do we get that from? You know what I'm saying? Is it only that we only get that from the moral teachings of religion, or is there something in the heart, which is there when we get hurt, when someone does harm to us, either in speech or physical action? Where do we get that sense of right or wrong?
فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Continuing, Shaykh, so verse number 48 in brackets. Let them not hasten you to bring on them our punishment. Close brackets. How many a township that was given up to wrongdoing have I given respite to, but then seized them when they persisted in unbelief and injustices, and to me is the homecoming. The page before said, Shaykh Yusuf, how many of a township that was given to wrongdoing, but it doesn't mention I gave them respite. It just mentions how they were turned around, their roofs fall in caves. This type is talking about the verses that did not receive that imla, that sort of time extension by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, something that's going to be continued. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sometimes says, as He wills, different ways He deals with these unjust communities. Sometimes He takes them and punishes them quickly. Sometimes He gives them some respite.
Right.
But as we know, as another verse of the Quran says, when He does take them to task,
right,
He doesn't let them go.
SubhanAllah.
Verse 49, say, O messenger, O people, in brackets, I am not a man who can do whatever he wills, nor whatever you wish. Close brackets, I am only a plain warner sent to you. Verse 50, so those who believe and do good, righteous deeds, for them is a forgiveness and an honorable, generous provision.
Yeah, the Quran puts a heavy emphasis on here, on the issue of that the Prophet ﷺ is presenting the reality of affairs before us and the courses of action of the human being, which are harmful and which are beneficial, and the human being has to choose. But there's this heavy emphasis that has been placed in the Meccan Quran, and we see it here as well. This idea that good is rewarded, and the human choice comes to the fore. Before that, the idea of respite, and many may say that there's this concept of istidraj, that people put off the hour, people that disbelieve put off the hour, and they think that it would not come. But in reality, it's that respite or that time that they have that's extended to them is a concept of their own destruction being planned out for them because of what they deny.
Yeah.
And they're given time, but in reality, the dunya itself it's like making a war on them. And then the punishment will be even more grave because they have been given the time and the opportunity. But that's a reflection for all of us that we're all given time, not just to put ourselves, in one position of salvation and the others in a position of damnation, but that's a reflection for us that we all have limited time. Those of us that claim that we believe that we shouldn't be negligent in their reality. May Allah grant us that ability to see life for what it is.
Ameen. Continuing verse 51, as to those who strive against our revelations, seeking to frustrate and void them, they are the companions of the blazing flame.
Yeah, and the scholars, they say that part of the reality that's taking place here is denial of resurrection and the standing, before Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And that type of striving is in reward, or what it achieves is destruction for themselves.
Yeah. It also mentioned, it highlights them, not just in disbelieving, but وَالَّذِينَ سَعَوْا فِي آيَاتِنَا مُعَاجِزِينَ. They're really trying hard.
Yes.
We're in the Hajj season, when we think of the sa'i,
yes,
we think of running between Safa and Marwa, but here that's that same effort. It's a bit exhausting, but they're constantly struggling to avoid Allah's signs or to frustrate.
Well, you have to look at that contextual historical reality. They were.
Yeah.
They were torturing the believers. There was an economic blockade. They were starving them out. They were pushing them out of their safety, comfort zones. And so that was, that the ayah hits hard when you think about the suffering that the believers went through.
Yeah. And also, again, for us, when we get reminded of people today or groups that are struggling to block out God's signs and trying to make him void, Hasha. Well, even if they have success in this world, they have difficult days waiting for them in the hereafter.
Yes, and that's the promise of justice.
Yeah. Continuing verse number 52. Never did we send a messenger or a prophet before you, but that when he recited God's revelations to the people, in brackets, Satan would make insinuations, in brackets, about these revelations, prompting people to misconstrue them in many wrong senses rather than the right one, close brackets. But God abrogates whatever insinuations Satan may make, and he confirms and establishes his revelations. God is all-wise, all-knowing. He makes, verse 53, Satan's insinuations a trial for those in the center of whose hearts there is a disease that extinguishes their power of understanding and corrupts their character, and who have hardened hearts. The wrongdoers have certainly veered far from the truth and are in wide schism. Verse 54, it's just because it's connected, I'm reading it together. While those who have been granted knowledge of the truth know that whatever God reveals is the truth itself, and they believe in it, and their hearts submit to Him in utmost humility. God most certainly guides to a straight path those who believe with sincerity. SubhanAllah, these verses and many verses in the Quran, the concept of a fitna,
Yes.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala using one thing, it can be a source of a fitna. It means it can be a source of guidance for some, a source for some to display the certainty in Iman by just submitting and saying, Kullu min indillah.
Right.
But a source of fitna and a source of deviation for others, for those who have a corruption, disease, trying to constantly talk about it or perhaps spread false interpretations of that. We see this in different, and we see this in the beginning of Surah Imran when it talks about the mutashabih. They always, those who in his hearts is some sort of corruption or some sort of a misguidance, they always seek the metaphorical. In Surah Mudaththir as well, with that 19 number, the number of angels respond for hellfire. Again, with these verses as well. We don't need to go into a lot of the tafsirs talk about what these verses are not, not only what these verses are. And it's ironic, when I was just reading Ustad Ali Wana's translation, that says Satan, he makes insinuations in brackets about those revelations, prompting people to misconstrue them in many wrong senses. Sometimes in our own tafsir literature, some of the other interpretations, there is this particular incident called Qissatul Gharaniq has been mentioned. We don't need to perhaps go into that, but basically an idea that Satan was able to whisper something to a Prophet and him in a state, Aisha, uttering those words, and the Meccans misunderstanding that and then being pleased by that. It's as if he said something favorable towards the three goddesses, Allat, Al-Uzza, Al-Manat, that Surah Najm talks about. Many tafsirs have talked about how from a kalam perspective, how from a hadith sciences perspective, how from just general Islamic principles perspectives, those tafsirs are not solid and cannot be relied upon. And in fact, the Quran's evidence from this surah and Surah Najm goes against that. But it ultimately, it's a sign, it's a test. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really mean here when He says, tamanna wa umniya, the longing? Some have interpreted it to mean recitation. But here it's also one of the unique verses where it very differentiates between messenger and prophet. And ultimately, I think this is a bit of a mushkil verse. Sheikh Yusuf, I haven't given you a chance to speak, sorry.
No.
But we're talking about the psychological state of a prophet and the game or the battle between shaitan and what the prophet is trying to do, and the effect of this tension on the hearts of believers, those whose hearts, have a lot of taqwa, but also, and humility, but also those whose hearts have diseases. So I think in the future, people will be able to, as we develop in the sciences of psychology, as the science itself develops, but also taking in consideration the psychology of Satan, because he does exist and he's an enemy. And the interplay and how that affects belief, I think there can be a lot said about this in the future. Even though the meaning is somewhat ghamid or not fully makshuf, to me personally.
In what sense?
Well, exactly what it's referring to, Allahu Alam. Satan makes insinuations. Allah SWT abrogates them, whatever Satan insinuates. And He confirms His revelations, yuhkim. But He makes Satan's insinuations a trial for those whose hearts is disease.
Well, some of the scholars, they talk about this being like the waswasa. We see that in Surah An-Nas, the waswasa, or the whisperings that can come from human beings or from the jinn, how they can have an impact. But some of them look at this and say that, that reality of doubt and even a doubt which is more entrenched, which becomes nifaq in the sense of kufr, where a person in their hearts, they don't believe at all. This we know at this stage of the Muslim community development during the time of the Prophet, nifaq begins to appear in the Medinan stage, where that wasn't the case before. So some of the scholars say that here there was that's in their hearts of doubt and nifaq, that becomes a test and a trial for them.
Yeah.
Right. And the irony of the situation is that it is definitely a test and a trial for them, because if you look at this historically, those who disbelieved in the Quran and those who disbelieved in the personage of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a living human being who was before them in the tangible, in the flesh, they saw the promise of Allah to aid His messenger come true. So what was in their hearts a doubt, it was overturned by the living reality that the Prophet ﷺ was given not only Medina but Mecca. And he was able to unite the people in the Tawheed, which was something that was a dream for many of the tribes of Quraysh in the past. They wanted that type of leadership, a people that was constantly at war with itself. And then those people of Nifaq, their state became a trial and a tribulation for them, because where at one point in time they will openly oppose Islam, now they had no ability to openly oppose Islam. So that the Quran is pushing them to correct themselves. Their state, like, what is it that you're going to do? Openly before you have supported kufr, now you have to hide it, because the believers, their conditions are not a condition of weakness where they can't defend themselves anymore. And now the believing community has become so big that you're in the minority. You know what I'm saying? And the conditions of Iman are those conditions that are set. You know what I'm saying? You can't just go around and oppress the believers. So in this case, you're oppressing yourself. The nafs is mentioned in that regard. And so those people, they're experiencing trial and tribulations internally within themselves. Whereas before, the trial and the tribulations were external, that the believers were being pushed out of their homes and so on and so forth. But these people, the people that have doubt and the people that have nifaq, what's going on in their hearts of the waswasa is just destroying them from within. So they have to come to some determination, like, do I stay in this state, or do I, turn to the Quran and the Prophet?
And you mentioned yesterday, but the theme of the qalb and the qulub is very dominant throughout the whole surah. The taqwa and the qulub, wajilat qulubuhum, because of the mentioning of God, their hearts tremble. And then the qulubs that make tukhbit lillah, they submit, humility. And then here we have the ones who have the marad in the qulub, the sickness. And then also al-qasiyat qulubuhum, their hearts are hardened. So it might not be, al-qasiyati qulubuhum, not just those who, have nifaq and open hypocrisy, but, hardening of our hearts. And you get so worried reading this, and you just feel like making that dua, Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qulubana ala dinik, yani. Because the heart can take so many different states, but that qasiyah one becomes a bit harder and is always a bit of a scary one, personally.
Yeah, well, at this stage of the da'wah, they're put to a test, because the Prophet ﷺ is no longer in a position where he could be challenged in the same way that he was challenged in Mecca.
Yeah.
So now the issue becomes, where do you stand? Is your heart hardened to the truth that's being made manifest before you? And here the Quran, there's two things that are taking place. The Quran is talking about the coming of the last day, but at the same time, the Quran is comforting the people, and the people are seeing the promise of Allah to support His messenger come true. That was the perfect opportunity to completely deny the truthfulness of the messenger. Oh, well, you said that your God was going to help you. You know what I'm saying? And look at your state. No, the actual oppression of the believers being pushed out of Mecca was similar. It would benefit like in Hudaybiyah. You know what I'm saying? That it looked one way. You know what I'm saying? It looked like it was a loss and tribulation and, compromise, but in reality, it was an opportunity for the believers.
Yeah.
The same thing, we're being pushed out and forced to migrate or the hijrah. Medina became the city of the Prophet Muhammad.
That's true. And the next page actually talks about the hijrah.
And this reality became one, in which the promise of Allah again manifests itself, that Allah will aid the messenger and the followers.
No.
If only they stay firm. Because this is an abode of struggle and trial and tribulation, is not an abode of jazat, not an abode of reward. The abode of reward is in here.
Here. Yeah, I think this theme of God promising and it coming true that you highlighted a few times is very dominant in these few pages. Verse number 55, the last verse. Whereas those who persistently disbelieve will not cease to be in doubt about the last hour revelation, until the last hour comes upon them suddenly, or there comes to them the punishment of a barren day, in brackets, when every hope would turn into despair, and after which there will be no night to rest in. Yawmin Aqim, some have said the Battle of Badr, because, their children died, or Day of Judgment, because there's no days coming after that. Jazakallah khair. Inshallah.
Allah yastaleen.
Ameen. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.